Well, I think in a case like that, indeed, this information should be given to the lawyers for the two defense, for the two accused in this case. But I think also because it involves, for example, the diplomatic intrigues between two countries, Malaysia and North Korea. Sometimes, for example, the Malaysian authorities may be slightly hesitant in providing this information. But since many of these information pieces have been available quite publicly, I think it's a matter of time before the Malaysian authorities will be providing the lawyers for the two accused of this information. I don't think the Malaysian authorities will be deliberately try to deprive them of this information, because if the Malaysian authorities were to do so, then if they were convicted, those would be, so for example, grounds for appeal to higher courts. Yeah.
Mr. Yang, now, if convicted, the two suspects could face death penalty, as I mentioned. Some say they are being scapegoats for the real culprits because, you know, the other suspects are nowhere to be found at this moment. Do you think the eventual verdict could be fair?
I think that would be very, very difficult decision by the higher court in Malaysia, simply because that's not a pure legal case, but involved heavily in diplomatic, political relations between Kuala Lumpur and Pyongyang, even between Kuala Lumpur and Jakarta and Hanoi, because of the two suspects hold different nationalities. However, I'm sure the result of the sentence will be very negative to the two suspects based on the already existed evidences.
For instance, are you going to, are you talking about the suspected use of the nerve gas that a lot of people say have been found on the body of Kim Jong Nam?
Well, it's a quite controversial issue. Now, all the information released by Malaysia authorities say the agent was VX, but DPRK has provided very strong argumentation against this conclusion. So before the authorities of Malaysia provided the further evidences to support what they said previously, I think the disputes will continue, even between the lawyer for the defensive lawyer and the court will have a very serious debates about the evidences, about the results, about the suspect's involvement, the degree of the involvement, and so on. So in short, further evidences are desperately needed by all both of the sides.
Dr. Oh, do you share Mr. Yang's view? And also, it is quite interesting to see the three DPRK suspects being allowed to go back to the DPRK as part of a swap deal with the DPRK. How important are they in deciding the outcome of the case, in the fair trial of the case?
Well, I agree partially with my colleague from Beijing, in the sense that these two suspects from Vietnam and from Indonesia, they were caught sort of red-handed by CCTV footages of smearing some sort of chemicals on Mr. Kim Jong Nam, and apparently Mr. Kim Jong Nam died as a result of that. Well, but then on the other hand, number one, you have to establish that Mr. Kim indeed died of those chemicals which they smear on his face. And number two, their contention, the arguments of the two accused is that they thought that it was a so-called prank. They thought that they were trying to sort of make fun of Mr. Kim, trying to surprise him with a birthday wish or something. And apparently previously they had practiced with their controllers or handlers, but under the impression that they were about to give a birthday surprise to Mr. Kim Jong Nam. So, and if that is the case, if the court accepts that, then there's no murder case. There may be a case of so-called manslaughter, namely with a lower level of the intent to kill. Namely, for example, they were playing some prank, but unfortunately the victim died of those pranks. Then they will not be sentenced to death, they will be sentenced to a number of years. But that is something in the future. But my guess, based on my own legal training, would be you'll be reduced to a manslaughter charge. As to the sort of the so-called swapping of the three North Korean suspects,
Well, we seem to have lost the line there. We might hope to re-establish the line, but let's come back to Mr. Yang here in Beijing. Why do you think the three suspects were able to return to the DPRK so quickly, given the importance of their role in deciding exactly what happened in this case, Mr. Yang?
Well, that is compromise between Kuala Lumpur and Pyongyang based on the humanitarian purposes, because at that time the two capitals engaged in war involving 9 citizens of Malaysia in Pyongyang and 3 in Kuala Lumpur, 3 North Koreans in Kuala Lumpur, and the 9 Muslim Malaysian citizens were suffered from the inconvenient food provisions and other reasons. So they desperately need to return to their homeland. Under that consideration, Malaysia made a very quick decision to compromise with Pyongyang. So the deal was made in a very short term. But for Malaysia, I think the deal was very good for Pyongyang because they got all they want to back. But for Malaysia, they lost some possible base for the possible evidences. But I really suspect that the 3 suspects returning to North Korea will be, to some degree, be involved in the upcoming court.
You don't think so?
No. I'm sorry. Yes, I do believe the 3 suspects, although not in Malaysia, will be to some degree involved in the court.
Is it possible for them to be sent back to
no,
Malaysia?
No.
It's absolutely not possible.
No possibility to let them back to the court, but the case will involve the 3 suspects' names, also maybe some roles, and so on. So that case in the court will be very, very complicated.
Yes. In fact, before they went back to the DPRK, they gave some interviews, right, to the Malaysian authority before they went. So possibly these interviews could be used against them. What about the 4 other people that fled the country right after the incident? How could their role be investigated, and how could, if they, broke the law, how could they be brought to justice?
I think that would be a very big question. If the video records has no direct indicators indicating the 4 suspects involved in the activities, I don't think Malaysia authorities will put all of the 4 into the court. However, if the case is the opposite, say they have a direct, clear video showing some involvements, then the 4 suspects, maybe plus the other 3 will be involved in the court. It's up to, basically, it's up to the evidences Malaysia authority has got.
Yeah, well, it's very difficult to find out then exactly what happened, because obviously these 2 ladies are not able to mastermind and conduct something as complicated as that. But one sentence maybe to how is this going to affect the relationship between Malaysia and the DPRK, very quickly.
No matter what the result of the court, the relationship between the 2 countries will be deteriorated than before.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Yang Xiyu from the China Institute of International Studies, and Dr. Aishah from the Nanyang Technological University. And as usual, here is my last point. Now, it's definitely too early to tell to what degree and in what way these two suspects have been involved. These two female suspects have been involved in the killing of whom the Malaysian government has identified as Kim Jong Nam, the estranged half-brother of Kim Jong Un. They might have been aware of what they were doing, or they might have been tricked into the whole thing. What is certain is they alone couldn't have carried it out. Having grown up in impoverished rural regions of their respective countries, they were making a humble living by doing small jobs, possibly even as sex workers. To use an internationally prohibited chemical weapon to kill is definitely not something that they could have masterminded or executed alone and successfully. As we know, 4 male suspects fled immediately and 3 others were handed back to authorities in the DPRK. Until and unless these people's role in the crime is found out, it will remain a mystery as to what really happened. And for now, these 2 female suspects could find themselves alone in facing harsh legal consequences of their actions and being in the international spotlight.